The morning my accountant called me from a gas station payphone, I thought he'd lost his mind. I remember standing in my kitchen, still in my robe, coffee going cold on the counter. It was a Tuesday, February. The kind of cold that doesn't feel dramatic, just gray and heavy, like the sky forgot to do anything else. My daughter had just left for work. My son-in-law was somewhere upstairs, and my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. "It's me," he said. "Don't say my name. Don't use yours either." I almost hung up. I'd known this man for 11 years. He did my books when I was still running 3 crews out of a beat-up office on Route 9. He watched my construction company grow from 14 employees to over 200. He came to my wife's funeral. He sat in the back pew and didn't say much, which was exactly right. And now he was calling me from a payphone, whispering, "There's something wrong with the sale documents," he said. "The ones your attorney filed last month. The numbers don't match what we agreed on." I told him I didn't understand. "I know you don't," he said. "That's why I'm calling. Don't sign anything else. Don't transfer anything. And please, don't tell your son-in-law I called." Then he hung up. I stood there holding the phone for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere outside a truck backed up, beeping. I looked at the coffee. I didn't drink it. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the context. I spent 31 years building Hale Brothers Construction. The name was a joke. I don't have a brother, but my first partner did, and when he bought out and moved to Arizona, the name stayed. By the time I turned 62, the company was doing close to $40 million a year in commercial contracts. Warehouses, retail builds, the occasional school renovation. I wasn't rich by Wall Street standards, but I'd built something real with my hands and my head and a lot of early mornings. My wife passed 4 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 8 weeks from diagnosis to the end. I don't talk about that much because there's nothing to say that makes it smaller. And I'm not interested in making it smaller. I just lived with it. My daughter, who I'll call my daughter because that's who she is to me, had been my anchor through all of it. She moved back home for 6 months after her mother died. She didn't ask. She just showed up with a bag and said she was staying for a while. I didn't argue. Her husband, my son-in-law, had always been polite to me. That's the word I'd use, polite. The kind of polite that never gets warmer no matter how many Thanksgivings you sit through together. He worked in finance. He had opinions about golf courses and strong opinions about wine. He was good-looking in a way that seemed like effort. I never disliked him. I just never fully trusted him either, and I thought that was just old man stubbornness on my part. When I decided to sell the company, he was the one who connected me with the attorney. I want to be clear about that. He made the introduction. He said the firm was reputable, that they'd handled several large asset sales in the region, that they were discreet. I had no reason to question it. My daughter seemed pleased I was finally taking the retirement seriously. I shook the attorney's hand and thought about fishing. The sale price we agreed to was $8.3 million. After taxes and fees, I was expecting somewhere around $5.8 to land in my accounts. I signed what felt like 300 pages of documents over 4 separate appointments. I trusted the process because I trusted my attorney, and I trusted my attorney because my son-in-law said I should. The closing was scheduled for March 15th. The payphone call came February 11th. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and tried to think like a younger version of myself, the version who once caught a subcontractor skimming materials and handled it quietly and correctly without burning everything down. I needed to think, not react. In the morning, I drove to a copy shop 20 minutes from my house and printed every document I had related to the sale. I hadn't looked at most of them closely after signing. Why would I? I had an attorney. That was the point of having an attorney. I spread everything across a folding table in my study and spent 2 days going through it page by page. On the 3rd page of the amended partnership dissolution agreement, a document I did not remember signing, my signature appeared above a clause that redirected 11% of the net proceeds to a holding company I had never heard of. I read it 4 times. The holding company was called Meridian Asset Partners, LLC. I wrote the name on a notepad and stared at it for a while. Then I went upstairs, told my son-in-law. I was thinking about taking a few days up at a friend's lake house before the closing craziness started, and asked if my daughter was around to have dinner that night. He said she was working late. I said that was fine. I had already decided not to tell her. Not yet. Not until I understood what I was looking at. My accountant and I met at a diner 40 miles outside the city. He drove separately. We sat in a corner booth and he slid a folder across the table without saying anything. Inside was a printed registration document for Meridian Asset Partners LLC. The registered agent was a name I didn't recognize, but the address on file was a suite number in a professional building downtown. It was the same building where my son-in-law's firm had its offices. I sat with that for a moment. "How long have you known?" I asked. 3 weeks, he said. I started pulling threads after I noticed the amended document had a different notary stamp than the others. I almost convinced myself it was a clerical error, but it wasn't. "The LLC was registered 8 months ago," he said, "before you ever started the sale process." I looked out the window. There was a Walmart across the highway. A woman was loading grocery bags into a minivan while a toddler sat in the cart. Normal life happening 30 feet away. "He set this up before I even decided to sell," I said. My accountant didn't answer. He didn't need to. "Did the attorney know?" "I think the attorney may be the other partner," he said quietly. "I haven't been able to confirm it, but the timing and the structure are, they're not coincidental." I nodded slowly. "I need you to not tell anyone you found this," I said. "I haven't told a soul," he said. "That's why I called from a payphone." I drove home that night without the radio on. 214 miles of dark highway. I thought about my wife, which I wasn't expecting. I thought about how she used to say that the worst thing about getting older wasn't the body. It was learning that people you thought were solid could turn out to be hollow. I thought she was being cynical when she said that. I was wrong. I thought about my daughter, whether she knew, whether it was possible she didn't. I turned that question over and over and couldn't land anywhere clean. The next morning I called a friend of mine who'd retired from the DA's office 6 years ago. I didn't tell him everything, just enough. He listened without interrupting, which is a lawyer habit I've always appreciated. "You need a forensic accountant and a separate attorney," he said. "Not a referral from anyone connected to the sale. Someone you find yourself. And in the meantime, you act exactly like nothing is wrong." That was the hardest part. I had dinner with my daughter and my son-in-law 3 times over the following 2 weeks. I talked about the closing. I talked about my plans for the lake house. I mentioned that I was thinking about maybe doing some volunteer work with a Habitat chapter in Asheville. I watched my son-in-law's face the entire time. He was good. His expression never changed. He passed the bread and topped off my wine and asked how I felt about the Steelers' draft prospects, and I told him I hadn't been following it. My daughter seemed lighter than she had in months. That hurt me in a way I didn't expect. Meanwhile, I had hired a forensic accountant named, well, I'll call her my outside accountant, and a business litigation attorney out of Pittsburgh who came recommended by my retired DA friend. I gave them everything, every document, every signature page, every email from the selling attorney's office that I'd saved in a folder on my desktop. She found the Second Amendment in 48 hours. There was a revised Schedule B buried in the closing package that changed the payout structure in a way that would have funneled approximately $900,000 away from my net proceeds through a fee arrangement with a consulting entity. The consulting entity did not appear to have any staff, any website, or any history of performing consulting work for anyone. When she showed me her report, I asked her to explain it to me like I was a jury. "Someone used your attorney's access to insert modified documents into the closing package after you reviewed them," she said. "They were counting on you not rereading documents you'd already signed, and Meridian Asset Partners is where the money was going to land," she said. "Your son-in-law is listed in a related LLC as a managing member." I didn't say anything. "Are you all right?" she asked. "No," I said, "but keep going." The closing was 12 days away when my litigation attorney filed an emergency petition to freeze the transaction. I wasn't in the room when it happened. I was sitting in my truck in a parking garage downtown, listening to the radio, eating a sandwich I didn't taste. My attorney called me when it was done. That afternoon, my son-in-law texted me asking if I'd heard anything unusual from the title company. I wrote back, "Nothing yet. These things always slow down at the end. You know how it is." He sent a thumbs-up emoji. I put my phone face down on the seat and finished my sandwich. My daughter found out on a Wednesday. My attorney had recommended I tell her before the story broke through official channels, and I agreed. I drove to their house. My house, technically. I'd helped them with the down payment, and I asked to speak with her alone. My son-in-law was there, and he looked at me with an expression I can only describe as careful. He said he had some calls to make and went upstairs. I sat across from my daughter at the kitchen table, and I put the folder in front of her. She didn't say anything for a long time after she finished reading. "How long have you known?" she asked finally. "About 5 weeks, and you didn't tell me." "No," she looked at the table. "Do you think I knew?" I thought about how to answer that. I thought about all those dinners, her easy laugh, the way she'd hugged me after I signed the final pages, like she was genuinely proud of me for finally letting go. "I don't think you knew," I said. She started crying then, quietly, and I sat with her. I didn't try to make it smaller. I just sat with it the way I'd learned to sit with hard things. My son-in-law came downstairs 20 minutes later. He looked at both of us and understood immediately. He said my daughter's name once, like a question, and she looked at him in a way I hope I never have to see again. He left that night. The investigation took 7 months. The selling attorney, a man I had shaken hands with, whose office had a photo of him with a senator on the wall, was disbarred and charged with wire fraud, conspiracy to commit fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. His license was revoked the same week federal prosecutors announced the indictment. His name was in the news for about 4 days, and then the news moved on to other things the way it always does. My son-in-law was charged separately: conspiracy to commit wire fraud, filing false documents, participation in a fraudulent scheme. His attorney argued he was a peripheral figure who had no direct role in altering the documents. The jury didn't agree. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison plus restitution. The day the verdict came in, I was sitting in my truck again. Different parking lot. I'd started doing that, sitting in parking lots when I needed to think without anyone around. It's not as strange as it sounds. There's something about being in a familiar space that moves that helps. My attorney called me with the verdict, and I said thank you, and hung up. Then I sat there for about 20 minutes. I thought about 11%. I thought about a company I built for 31 years. I thought about a man who sat at my Thanksgiving table and passed me the gravy and looked me in the eye while he was planning this. I thought about my daughter, who had filed for divorce the month after I showed her that folder, who was doing better now than I had any right to hope. I thought about my accountant, calling from a payphone in the rain, not sure I'd believe him, calling anyway. I started the truck and drove home. My accountant retired later that year. I took him and his wife to dinner at a steakhouse he'd been talking about for a decade, the kind of place with white tablecloths and a sommelier who doesn't make you feel stupid. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We talked about his grandkids and a fishing trip he was planning in Montana, and whether the Penguins had any real chance this season. When the check came, I wouldn't let him touch it. He said I didn't have to do that. I said I knew. I drive past the office building sometimes, where my company used to be headquartered, where I signed all those documents, where I shook hands with a man I thought was working for me. They've renovated the lobby. It looks different now. I don't feel much when I drive past it, which surprised me at first. I thought I'd feel angry, or sad, or something sharp. Mostly I just feel like it was a long time ago, even though it wasn't. My daughter comes for dinner on Sundays. She started taking a watercolor class, which I tease her about, and she's better at it than I expected. There's a small painting of the lake house on my refrigerator now, held up with a magnet from a hardware store in Vermont. She painted it from a photograph my wife took years ago. I look at it every morning when I get my coffee. The sale closed eventually, with a new attorney, a forensic review of every document, and enough oversight to make a bank examiner comfortable. The final number was close to what I'd originally expected. I bought a better truck. I kept the lake house. I sleep fine. What I think about, when I think about all of it, is how close it came to working. If my accountant had noticed a week later, if I had signed the final documents before he called, if I had been the kind of man who doesn't read things carefully, who trusts everything because trusting everything is easier, I almost was that man. I'd earned the right to be, I thought. 62 years, a lifetime of work, a company sold. I thought the hard part was over. Turns out the hard part is never the one you're expecting. But I'm still here. My daughter's painting is on my refrigerator. The truck runs well, And somewhere in Montana, a retired accountant is standing in a cold river in waders, thinking about something other than numbers. That's enough. Most days, that's more than enough.